Everyone, and welcome to this latest Q&A with me, Abhinav Agarwal. And today, as you can guess, my guest is Aditi Banerjee, the a best-selling author and also who has come out with her latest book on Kashi. Without further ado, I'm going to share the cover of the book. It is absolutely incredible. The cover itself is something that invites you in. And the book is titled Kashi, the Valiant History of a Sacred Geography. And it's been published by Blue One Ink. Now, as you can guess, the book is about Kashi. No surprises there. But there are a few things that are different in this book from your typical other books that have come out on Kashi. And we'll talk a little bit about that also. And I want to read out a couple of paragraphs or pieces of advanced praise that this book has gathered. The first one is from Sri Vivek Debroy, economist and possibly India's greatest living translator of our epics. He writes, Kashi is Shiva's city, and there has been renewed interest in Kashi not merely because of Gyanvapi. Visitors to Kashi have often asked me about a good book to read on Kashi. I have hesitated. Kashi Khand of Skanda Puran, how do I persuade visitors to look beyond Vishveshwar and the Ghats? There is no one more suited than Aditi Banerjee to write such a book on Kashi, and she has filled a much needed vacuum. Sacred geography stories from Stala Purana to yoginis and Aditya temples, pilgrimage paths, and more recent history of the city. There are all these and more. A wonderful and remarkable book about a wonderful and remarkable city. As far as praise goes from people, I don't think it gets any better than this. Then there is Sri Sanjeev Sanyal, again one of the authors who can be credited with reviving an interest in India's history and geography in a very unique way with his book that came out more than 10 years back, The Land of the Seven Rivers. And he writes that Kashi is a much needed book about the ancient history and sacred geography of Varanasi, the city at the heart of Sanatan Dharma. Aditi painstakingly delves into the many legends that explain why the city is so sacred to all Hindus. So, with that, Namaskar, Aditi, and welcome to this show.
Namaskar. Thank you so much for having me and for reading those parts out.
Now, let us begin straight off with so some very distinguished writers have come out with very fine books. Obviously, there is Padma Shri, Professor Meenakshi Jain, who came out Kashi Waits and Waits, and then there is another one by distinguished historian Vikram Sampath that also came out, which was coincidentally also published by Blue One. So yours is now the third book. My obvious question is, isn't this what they call in popular parlance a genre overload?
It's a great question. So I'll start by saying both Meenakshi Jain and Vikram Sampath's books are, in my view, must reads. And they are historians and scholars like par excellence. And so to really understand the history of the dispute and what has been happening in Kashi, their books are very important. I would say what's maybe there in my book that's a little bit different is something that came in the process of discovery for me. So they say when you're writing a book, if in the process you haven't surprised yourself or learned something, then the book itself isn't worth writing. And so for me, when I first started writing this book about Kashi, it was very much like a legal or intellectual argument about why something should happen a certain way with the Gyanvapi dispute in my mind. And in the process, I was going to write a chapter about the Kashi Khand in Skanda Purana and just say, here's the Stala Purana about Kashi. But as I was reading this, I really got entranced by the Stala Purana and all the stories of the lore about each and every Shiva Linga. There's so many tirthas and lingas, and there's Professor Rana P.B. Singh at BHU. He's actually done a meticulous cataloging of the number of the Shiva Lingas cited in the Skanda Purana, which of them are actually known and can still be visited today, which may have been lost, and things like that. So there's so much meticulous detail. And as I was reading it, I felt very transformed by it. I'd been to Kashi a few times, but then I realized I haven't really experienced the full Kashi because I didn't have this reading behind me. And so what I felt was very important was to provide a condensed summary of the Stala Purana of the Kashi Khanda in the book itself, because in the Indic traditions in Hinduism, things are experiential. So I didn't want to just say Kashi is a sacred city, Kashi is a city of Shiva. It's really through these stories and through reading these stories you feel the importance and magnificence of each linga, each tirtha, each shrine to Bhairava, each inch of this kshetra. And you also get a sense of Kashi as a kshetra. So not just the Vishwanath temple and the Gyanvapi well, but also all of these, you have 56 Ganeshas who protect the city. You have the Ashta Bhairava, you have all of these Devis. And so getting the sense for that as a kshetra, as a territory that's unified and sacred, not just for one or two places, but as a whole. So I wanted to convey that too. So that's why the first part of the book actually goes into a lot of detail to share what's in the Kashi Khanda of the Skanda Purana.
Indeed, it is. In fact, you have almost 180 pages in the second section of your book, the Stala Purana, the sacred geography of Kashi, and starting from Agastya Muni's sacrifice all the way to actually the sacred geography of Kashi. The separation of Sati and Shiva and Shiva's return, and the argument between Brahma and Shiva, which actually happens to be a recurring theme, not just in the Skanda Puran, but also in the Shiv Puran. But the word sacred geography has been used in your book and elsewhere, and I had often wondered about what is it about a sacred geography, the phrase itself, two words, sacred and geography, that is different from just a combination, a conflation of two words. And you begin your book by talking about sacred geography, and then you return to that same topic towards the end of your second section, the sacred geography of Kashi. So my question is, if I go to page 201, you talk about okay, so here on page 213, you say that there was, and I'll read from page 213. It says that building on Eliot's ideas about sacred space and Wheatley's 1971 studies on the origin of Asian cities, Jeffrey Meyer in 1991 laid out the characteristics of what may be considered a cosmicized sacred city, of which Beijing was the last of a long line in China in his analysis. And you have quoted Singh's work from 2013, and you write that Singh notes that such examples are rare in India, but in the few instances that exist, such as Kashi, there generally appear to be 4 reference routes delimiting the sacred space. Now, first question is that what do we mean when we say sacred geography? And the second one is that why is it that in India, for instance, what Singh writes is that there are, instances of sacred geography are somewhat rare in India. That seems kind of paradoxical, right?
Yes. So I'll start with sacred geography as a concept. So I think when we talk about these disputes like Ayodhya, Gyanvapi, Mathura, we usually talk in terms of either history or mythology. So it's either something that happened in the past, or it's something based on what others may call just mythology and religious belief and things like that. The reason I think sacred geography is important is because there is a present harm and a present vested interest that's happening now. So a lot of times what people say is, why are you bringing up what happened in the 1600s in Gyanvapi? That was in the past. We should be looking forward. But the point is, if as a devotee you go to Kashi and you see Nandi and you see the original site of Vishwanath, and we're not able to access that, that's something, that sense of injustice, that sense of deprivation, that sense of separation and woundedness is something that's occurring now. And that's really what sacred geography gets into, which is that place is not just a physical place, but that actually has meaning, and it has psychological impacts on safety, belonging, things like that. So how we imbue a place with meaning, to space with meaning, to make it a place, or a sacred place. And this isn't something that is just something happened of historical significance or something like that, but it's also something that's like a living tradition. So in our tradition, what makes a place sacred is the devas may have had their lila there, but then there is tapobala that's accumulated over centuries and thousands of years, because rishis have gone there, pilgrims have gone there, they've done their penance there, they've done sadhana there. And there's a unique character that comes also because that linga, or that deva, or that deity has its own character and vrittis. And so when you go to one, it's unique. So Kashi is different from Kedarnath, which is different from Pashupatinath, and things like that. So each of them are important in their own way. And so in indigenous traditions worldwide, this was something that was very much understood. So in ancient Greece, people would go to Daedalus and Delphi, which were great sanctuaries of Apollo. And it was like a pilgrimage. People would spend months doing this. It wasn't, sometimes when we think of these religions now, they're caricatured as, oh, it was just very primitive and fun and all of that. But it was actually very serious to them. And so that sense of a place being very important. And in Hinduism, it's about the kshetra. So it's not just one temple or one shrine, but you have kind of like a mandala. You have a concentric circle. So you have like the Antagriha, which is the most sacred spot. But then you have like protector deities around. You have the Bhairavas around. You have others, like in Kashi, you go to Dhundi Maharaj Ganesha to seek permission to go to Kashi. There's a sequence of that. And that sequence has a lot of metaphysical and spiritual significance. And so Puri has something similar. So it's like a kshetra shaped like a shanka or a conch shell. And so it's very important, this when you lose a place, it harms the integrity of the whole. So this sense of sacred geography is something which we really don't have today. And Diana Eck has written a book about this, about just the sacred geography in Bharat and how India as a nation is founded on these bonds of sacred geography. What Professor Singh was referring to is that we have very few cities in India that are like this, because we have, it's not that sacred geography isn't there, but we haven't so much like organized that into like an urban framework like Beijing. So I think that was kind of the reference there. But he's actually one who talks a lot. I mean, his entire career is devoted to sacred geography, particularly in Kashi, and how even today domestic tourism within Bharat is fueled mostly by visits for sacred geography, based on Stala Purana and things like that. So that's kind of the context of why sacred geography is important.
That's an interesting point to bring up about, tourism in India has historically been driven by these visits to sacred places. In fact, in the Mahabharata, which happens to be my favorite book among all, there are two, there, of all the 97, 99 upaparvas of the Mahabharata, there are two upaparvas that are named the same, and those are the Tirthyatra Parva. In the Aranyak Parv, there is I think the 33rd upaparv, which is the Tirthyatra Parv, and then again right in the Shalya Parv, right before the battle between Duryodhan and Bhim takes place, you have Balram, who comes back after I think a 29, 30-day pilgrimage that he had embarked on. And the battle that has not yet begun, that is paused for a little more time, while Balram recounts all the pilgrimage sites that he had gone to in the Tirthyatra Parv. So it's fascinating that, this concept of tourism has been, these holy spaces, sacred geographies have been a driver of tourism in India, so to say, for thousands of years. To that end, Yes, go on.
I would actually make a comment on that point, which is about Tirtha Yatra. So that word itself is very important. So Tirtha is like a crossing place. So typically there was like a river or water body, but it also meant obviously crossing from the mundane world into the more spiritual. But there was also this sense of having to travel for it. So in those days, even until fairly recently, like if you went to the Char Dham in the Himalayas, that could be a very dangerous journey. Even going to Kashi in the old days, that could take months and there could be illness and people would die. It wasn't that uncommon. But that was part of the experience. So actually in the Kashi Khand of the Stala Purana, there's a story of Shiva Sharman, and he's making a Tirtha Yatra to the Saptapuri, the 7 cities which bestow mukti. So the Saptapuri, it's Kashi, Ayodhya, Mathura, Dwaraka, Kanchi, Ujjain, and Haridwar. So it turns out he was living in Ayodhya. And so because he was living in Ayodhya, in one of the cities of the Saptapuri, he added to his list Prayag, which is another sacred place. Because the idea was, since you're already living there, that doesn't really count as a Tirtha Yatra. So the sense of there being penance or austerity or some effort that has to be made has also been there, which is interesting when you think about today, and you have a lot of this development and making it very convenient to access these places, and how much convenience should there be versus having a little bit of austerity when going on Tirtha Yatra.
That's a very fascinating topic. I'm not going to get into that. I think it's a very incendiary topic, I think, among Hindus. And if you go to social media, you will find almost on the verge of war discussions happening there. Some denounce this building of infrastructure in holy places, holy cities, as basically drive-by tourism, while others say that we have to have infrastructure development, otherwise you cannot have these cities fall into neglect as they have for a long time, thanks to colonial apathy, and then post-colonial, post-independent incompetence, apathy, call it what you will. And there are very divergent views on this. But to the to as far as Kashi is concerned, it is called, so in Kurukshetra, for example, right before the Mahabharata war, it was decreed that anyone who died in war would attain moksha. They wouldn't have to, their ashes wouldn't have to be immersed in the Ganga for them to attain salvation, so to say. And Kashi is described as a city where anyone who dies attains salvation. Now, you write that that is the Puranic view, but the Vedantic view is slightly different. You have to have wisdom before you attain moksha, right? And you write on page 40 that Hindu pundits have painstakingly reconciled this Vedantic view with the theology of Kashi. They have reiterated that it is indeed wisdom that bestows liberation. Death by itself, even in a sanctified place like Kashi, cannot be a sufficient condition to attain moksha. And you go on to describe what exactly they meant. Now, tell us, what do they mean when they say the attainment of wisdom, and what is it? It's not death itself that brings wisdom. You write that. So tell us, what liberates these people?
Yes. So that was another interesting finding for me, because everyone has heard that, everyone knows that people either go to Kashi in their final days, or after their loved ones have passed away, they bring their ashes to Kashi for immersion. But what was interesting is, a lot of times we think, oh, it's a superstition and this is just a belief and it's something like that. But what's interesting when you look into it is that our acharyas really took these questions very seriously. So they wouldn't just say for exaggeration or to hype a place that, yes, go to Kashi and you'll attain moksha. So what they said is, the reason why Kashi is sacred is because Shiva has made the promise that anyone who dies, including even non-human beings, he takes over the responsibility for them. And he will utter the Taraka mantra in their ears as they're about to die. So the Taraka mantra is like the mantra of crossing. So it's the mantra that allows you to cross from samsara into mukti. And so the quandary that this provided to our acharya is, well, if that's the case, then a human being doesn't have to do anything, because you know that in the Vedantic sense, only jnana, or the dawning of real self-realization, is what can produce mukti. So how can that happen? And so the way that this was resolved is that a few things. One is the hearing of the Taraka mantra produces an awakening. And so that is what leads to moksha. But there's another part also, which is that you have karma. So not everyone who comes to Kashi is, fully purified. And so there's also something called the Bhairava Yatana. So this is kind of like your karmic reckoning. And what happens is, instead of taking lifetimes or decades or years to expiate this karma, there's a moment of Bhairava Yatana before death, when all of that reckoning happens. It's a very intense moment, but it's just a moment. And so you're not taking a shortcut. You're not escaping karma, but it's just a way of expeditiously resolving it. And you still have the jnana, you still have all of that. Also, the other part of it is not everyone can go to Kashi. Even today, I hear stories from friends who they want to go to Kashi. Now it's so easy, but there's a sense of, if you're not called, you're not able, because of karmic reasons, to even come to Kashi. So there is a very sophisticated philosophical framework in which all of these things are to be understood, and not as just a superstition.
So true. Both profound in a way, as well as how the two supposedly contradictory viewpoints are resolved through this. And the other thing that I really liked is that you write that the Puranic accounts lead us from the abstract to the experiential. And I thought this was again such a wonderful wonderful line that really brings to life what the Puranas are. Because often enough, sometimes at least the question comes is that we have the Vedas and we have the Upanishads, so why do we need the Puranas? Aren't they just a bunch of stories? But I think what you write is so beautiful. It puts it so beautifully that sometimes the messages of the Vedas, of the Upanishads, can be abstract. It is the smritis essentially that make them more bring the messages closer home by making them experiential, whether it is the Mahabharata, the Ramayana, or the copious accounts in the Puranas. Now you have several chapters I think about 12 or 13 chapters on the Stala Purana. Any in particular that appealed to you when writing, so again, two things. First is, do you want to give a brief account of how you went about selecting these accounts from the Puranas, the Stala Puranas, and actually, what is a Stala Purana? I think that will be a good way to begin.
Sure. So the Stala Purana is effectively like a subset of, so we have like the Itihasa and the Purana, and then the Purana themselves have like 5 lakshanas on what makes a Purana. So it's not just stories, but it's also stories that talk about like Sarga, the creation, the genealogies of rishis and kings. They also have to do with about the creation, the dissolutions, like the kind of the cosmic cycle of time, and some other attributes. But generally speaking, they have an adhyatmic aspect to them, and they're focused on one or multiple devas. And so that's the Puranas in general. And then the Stala Purana is like a subset of this literature. Some in Sanskrit, some also in the vernacular languages that deal with a particular place. And so when you're talking about a particular place, what was the divine origin, or the divine lila, the play of the devas and devi that happened there? Who were the rishis who visited there? What are the deities and the lingas that you find there? What is the significance of them? You go to one Shiva Linga, you may get great siddhi. You go to another one, it may it may purify your bhakti, and that is a result of the practices that have been done there. Sometimes the Gandharva or an Apsara or Yogini, and then there are different stories and lila associated with it. So when you know that, and then you visit that that place, then you can easily tap into the energy there and attain maximum benefit. So if you didn't have the Stala Purana, for example, if we didn't have the Kashi Khanda and the Skanda Purana, we wouldn't even know what Vishwanath is. We wouldn't know what Gyanavapi is. We would have you would have no idea. So that's the importance of these Puranas. It tells us not just where to go and how to go, but also why we're going there. And time and again, we can't take it for granted. And that was another reason I wanted to spend so much time and space in the book on the Stala Purana, specifically in the Skanda Purana, because it wasn't easy to do. So there were successive rounds of invasion and destruction of temples. And then the acharyas and the panditas would go out again and rediscover lost temples, lost shrines. Like for example, in Kashi, there's something called the Panchakroshi Yatra. So it's like a 16-kilometer circumference around Kashi, and there are many different shrines along the way that are to be visited. When these destructions happened, for many years, decades, they would just be abandoned, and so many of the vigrahas were destroyed, or the path was lost. But they didn't stay lost, because our ancestors went out again, and many of the deities were hidden and they were protected. But then they marked that route, and they would tell people, this Panchakroshi Yatra is important, you must do it. So this is how it has been preserved. So it's really through Stala Purana that our sacred places are still living for us. Otherwise, we wouldn't have the knowledge about them. Even in these court cases, the Stala Purana are used as valuable references that talk about the history of a site. So it's incredibly important to our civilization and our religion to have this very meticulous documentation about thousands of deities and lingas and places.
Exactly. And it's fascinating that like, again, with the Mahabharata, we are told by scholars that the original Mahabharata may have been a lot smaller at, say, 24,000 verses, and over a period of time it became larger and larger till it acquired its current size of 100,000 verses, that is popularly known, or even the 73,000 verses in the critical edition. But I think the point there is that there were certain accounts, stories, and episodes that were considered so important that they couldn't afford to be lost, that scholars decided that the best way to make sure that they never got lost or forgotten was to include them into a text like the Mahabharata. And I think the same thing has happened with the Puranas also, because like you said, the Panch Lakshan is something that once you have described them in one book, why do you need to keep on repeating them? But I think the lesson there was more nuanced than I think we sometimes forget. And just it kind of boggled my mind when I first found out and read that the Skanda Puran is actually longer than the Mahabharata. It's it's 81,000 verses, and if you think about it, the critical edition of the Mahabharata, if you include even the Harivansh, is 79,000 verses. So there are translations of these Puranas that are available. Even the Vishnu Puran was first translated almost 200 years back, and we still have those. But I'm just wondering, as a way of digression, when Sri Vivek Debroy translates the Skanda Puran, how soon is he going to begin it? Because it's 81,000 verses, and I keep pestering him that he had better get started on it soon enough.
Yes, I told him the same thing, which was I was very sad. Well, in a way, I was very sad that I didn't have his translation to rely on. But again, if he had translated it, I wouldn't have needed to put in a summary in the book. But he said he's saving that one for last because it is the longest. And I realized I didn't answer part of your question. I also want to say there are also a class of literature called like Nibandhas, which are like digests of places to visit that were composed across the centuries. And what's very interesting is, again, like our dharma is never ossified. So in those Nibandhas, they would also say, I actually find this in the Skanda Purana also, if there is a place where actually not in the Skanda Purana, but in this Nibandas, they talk about if there was a place where there was like a Vigraha or a Shivalinga and it's no longer there, then that place is still also sacred and should be venerated. When they talk about like Prayashchitta and different things you can do for Prayashchitta, they talk about rebuilding of temples or protecting temples or things like that. So there was this sense, even when this destruction was happening, of how to preserve the sanctity. And so in the Stala Purana I really refer to the most in my book is just the Kashi Khanda of the Skanda Purana, because it's very comprehensive. And there are also accounts in Padma Purana and the other Puranas where it's mostly consistent, but there are, of course, variations. But there's a very beautiful, I found a very moving kind of framework to the story, which is that it starts with Agastya Muni, who has resided in Kashi for a very long time. And it starts with him being exiled from Kashi. And I won't go into the details, but basically as happens, there's the devas find themselves in a pickle. The cycle of yagya has been disrupted. They're not able to to perform their functions. They go to Brahma and Vishnu, and they're advised to seek Shiva. They're advised to seek Agastya Muni's counsel in Kashi. So they go to Kashi. They find this beautiful place of Shiva. They delight there, and they go to Agastya Muni, and then Agastya Muni realizes he has to leave Kashi to help the devas. But since he's a rishi, and the function of rishis is to help devas and to help sentient beings, he does this. And so the beginning of the Kashi Khanda is kind of this lamentation of Agastya Muni being parted from Kashi and this sorrow that he feels. And then along the way, he and his wife Lopamudra meet with Skanda, and Agastya Muni is just longing to hear about Kashi. So Skanda, who's the son of Shiva, tells the stories that he heard from Shiva and he heard from his mother, and then he's telling that to Agastya Muni, and that's kind of like the narrative framework. And then within that, there are two main story frameworks. Part of that, the first one is I briefly alluded to this earlier, which is there's Shiva Sharman, who was looking for moksha and looking to travel to the Saptapuri. And for reasons that are in the story, he's not able to attain moksha in the way that he wants, and he goes on this journey across all the different planets and things like that, and he learns about the significance of Kashi through that. And then the second part, which is the longer one, and really the main story of the Kashi Khanda, is there's a great king, Divodasa, who kind of, for again, for reasons I won't get into, takes over Kashi. And Shiva willingly leaves behind Kashi in King Divodasa's care because of a promise that Brahma made, and so he agrees to leave Kashi. But then Shiva himself feels very pained at leaving Kashi. And it's about all these machinations that happen, and all the devas go to Kashi and try to bring Shiva back. And then the end of it is again the return of Shiva to Kashi. And it's very moving when you read that, because again there's this sense that we have of the separation of Shiva from his sacred places, and it kind of, that bhava of it really resonates very strongly with kind of like the current context of the Gyanvapi dispute.
On that note, I want to read out from your very first part of the book, the introduction, because when you said the point about separation and it being such a moving account, that is something that you write about in your book itself. And you were talking about the Naga Sadhu, stand against the Mughal armies in 1664. And you write that the Naga Sadhu did not stand alone that day. In 1664, he stood with 60,000 other Naga Sadhus who had come to defend the site of Gyanvapi, where stood the grand Kashi Vishwanath Mandir, the holiest of holy sites in Kashi, which had already been rebuilt after having been destroyed twice before. The Naga Sadhus have no name, no past, no caste affiliation, no family, and no individual identity. All of this they have renounced, leading a life of incredible asceticism. They prefer a life of solitude, shying away from society. Yet on that day, they had joined forces to defend this temple of Shiva in the city of Shiva against an invader who would subsequently order the destruction of the most important of temples in Kashi and so many other places. That day, astonishingly enough, the Naga Sadhu won and defeated the army of the Sultan. The temple was saved and the army retreated. Now, before that, you also write that when you first went to Kashi and you went to the temple, you could only do a darshan of Nandi. And you write that a mosque towered over the temple compound, its shadow imposing in the evening light, and there, standing alone facing the mosque, waited an expectant Nandi, his gaze obstructed by the wall of the mosque. Tell us a little bit about these episodes, these periodic recurring episodes of destruction and rediscovery and the rebuilding of temples and their destruction again, leading essentially to the point in the 18th century when Rani Ahilabai Holkar had the current temple rebuilt.
Yes. So it is. So I would start again with the Stala Purana. So we know we've heard the names of Vishwanath and Gyanavapi. Many of us have not heard of Avimukteshwara. So Avimukteshwara at one point was perhaps even more prominent than Vishwanath, or as he's known in the Skanda Purana, Vishveshwara. And it's said in the Skanda Purana that Vishwanath himself would revere Avimukteshwara as his guru. And what happened is in the first bouts of destruction, there was the Avimukteshwara, there was Vishveshwara, and then they kept having been moved. So there was a mosque that was built on the site of the original Vishveshwara site, and so then it was removed, and Avimukteshwara and Vishwanath were moved together. There's also it's also important to note the Puranic account of the relationship between Vishwanath and Gyanavapi. So Vishwanath was the primordial Shivalinga, and once there was a time, and this is very, very much in the past, when there weren't even oceans in the world. So there was no source of water bodies. And there was Ishana, who's a manifestation of Rudra. And he was wandering across the world, and then he came across Vishveshwara Linga, and he said, "It's so beautiful, I want to do Abhisheka, but there's no source of water." So he digs, and when he digs, there out surges this huge waves of water, larger than the earth itself, the purest water that has ever been seen. And with these waters, he bathes Vishveshwara. And then Shiva is very pleased and says, what boon shall I give you? And Ishana says, just reside in these waters, always. And so Shiva makes this promise, and he says, I will reside in the form of Jnana in this tirtha, in this well. So that's how it becomes Gyanavapi, the well of wisdom. So we call the Gyanavapi mosque, but Gyanavapi has nothing to do with Islam, obviously. And so this was this relationship between the two, and also Avimukteshwara. And then, repeatedly there were rounds of destruction, moving the temples, things like that. And over time, Avimukteshwara actually became kind of lost in knowledge. So people just thought Avimukteshwara and Vishveshwara were the same things. But this is where, again, the Stala Purana becomes important, because the great Panditas who did this, revived that knowledge that no, there was Avimukteshwara. Look here, he's referred to as the guru of Vishveshwara. But what had happened is, as the temples kept getting moved, it just became kind of like lost over time. So it's said now that the original Avimukteshwara Linga, there are just a few fragments of that. And it's somewhere kind of like, concealed among these Muslim graves in the space between the mosque and the Vishwanath temple. And at least up until some years ago, I think on Shivratri or Maga Shivratri, some devotees could go and sprinkle some flowers and water on that. That's all that's left of Avimukteshwara, who was once the guru of Vishveshwara. So you can imagine the sad plight of that is. In any case, what happened in the latest round, so then there was in the mid 1600s, this account of the Naga Sadhus taking the stand. What is the historical evidence for this? So Shri Jadunath Sarkar has written about this in his book, based on some notes he found in the archives of the Junakara. So that's what he bases his account on. But there's there's another larger tradition of what I call like warrior yogis or warrior sadhus, which actually some Westerners have made like detailed studies of. And it's not just in Kashi, but also in Mathura and Ayodhya. They were, they took part. And there's also accounts of Sri Madhusudana Saraswati, who's a great Advaita Acharya and a follower, a disciple of Adi Shankara. And he was in Kashi, and it said at this time when Akbar was there, he said, he noticing what's happening to the Hindus, he said, we need some kind of order of monks who will protect Hindus. And it said that Akbar kind of gave him the authority to found this, and this is how the Naga Sadhu's tradition was really established. But what is very clear based on this history, and there's an oral history of this, and so some of this, one of the Western books I'd read about this talks about this oral history, and there was at the Kubabhisheka, and I think there was a historical Indian government record of this also, of interviews with sadhus where this knowledge has been preserved, and it's generally accepted as true that there was this battle. It's not known that it was the Sultan was referred to as Aurangzeb, but that's kind of what's assumed. And it's not coincidental that a few years later it was torn down. When the temple that at that time it wasn't the original, but the one that held Vishveshwara was torn down, one wall was kept of the old temple, which is still there now. And it was kind of kept there as a mark of humiliation for Hindus, so they would never forget. So that's kind of the history. And then later on, the present temple was constructed by Ahilyabai Holkar. And it's generally believed that the Vishveshwara Linga that is there now is the original one that was there in the past. But when I had gone about 10 years ago to Kashi for the first time, I just remember that feeling, because it's just so obvious, because you could see that wall, you could see Nandi, and Nandi's staring out, and Shiva's not there to look back at him. And it was just very painful, and there was like a searing kind of pain that I felt, even though the rest of my trip in Kashi was wonderful. I saw the Saptarishi Aarti. It was a wonderful darshan, but that's something that I couldn't forget. And what led me to write this book is, even just voicing that there is that pain, or there's that wrong, or there's this feeling of separation. Even that's something we're told we can't do because it's not secular. We're dredging up the past, or being communal. When you don't have the space to feel something that's very natural, then that's a deeply, deeply wrong. Whatever your thoughts may be on what should happen in this current litigation, but the fact that we can't even voice or articulate that there is this wrong, not that just happened hundreds of years ago, but that we as Hindus experience today every time we go to Kashi, every time we go to Mathura, is that's unacceptable. That is deeply wrong.
It's a sense of, it is rooted in denialism, is what I have come to understand, that every aspect of our identity, of the Hindu identity, has to be denied, whether it is even the historicity of our faith. We are told by certain eminent scholars is basically a colonial invention of the 19th century. Some IIT professor goes so far as to say it's an early 20th century invention. So every aspect of the identity has to be denied, and once it's got to be denied, and then it has to be dehumanized. And only when these two happen can you actually go about the complete destruction of an identity. Now, there are historical precedents to this that have taken place. I'm not going to get into, but essentially, I think that's a template that was followed successfully elsewhere and has been attempted in India for a long time. So one is there any specific passage, Aditi, that you would like to read for us?
So I can read perhaps that. Do you want me to read that part about the Naga Sadu, or do you cover that?
That would be wonderful. Yes, absolutely.
Because I will say that the two things that led me to write this book, one was the memory of my first visit to Kashi, which I just described, and then the other was I came across this story, and then it is just it deeply moved me. So I'll just read from the book. Imagine a man bared to the buttocks, but for a flutter of saffron cloth covering his loin. His body, bronzed by the baking sun and weathered by the wind, through decades spent wandering in jungles and remote mountainsides, is smeared white-gray with the ash of the puni, the holy fire that is his sole companion. Serpentine twists of matted hair sinuously wind down his back. A kamandalu, a gourd-carved round pot for collecting water and rice, lays at his feet. His hand brandishes a curved sword. Arrayed in front of this Naga Sadhu, the naked ascetic, stands the Sultan's army with cannons. We do not know for certain the identity of the Sultan, but in all probability it was Aurangzeb. This Mughal emperor, still remembered today for the terror and destruction wrought during his reign, destroyed many temples. Oddly enough, his reign inspires admiration and respect from some elite pockets of India and the West even today. A prestigious street in New Delhi was named after him, and only in recent years was the street name changed. The Naga Sadhu did not stand alone that day in 1664. He stood with 60,000 other Naga Sadhus who had come to defend the site of Gyanavapi, where stood the Grand Kashi Vishwanatha Mandir, the holiest of holy sites in Kashi, which had already been rebuilt after having been destroyed twice before. The Naga Sadhus have no name, no past, no caste affiliation, no family, and no individual identity. All of this they have renounced, leading a life of incredible asceticism. They prefer a life of solitude, shying away from society. Yet, on that day, they had joined forces to defend this temple of Shiva, in the city of Shiva, against an invader who had subsequently ordered the destruction of the most important of temples in Kashi and so many other places. That day, astonishingly enough, the Naga Sadhus won and defeated the army of the Sultan. The temple was saved and the army retreated.
Very eloquent and moving. Uh, in all the books that have come out on Kashi, each one, I think, it does a great service to the reader in bringing out certain aspects of history and of Kashi to the audience, to the reader. It's my opinion, very personal opinion also, but I think what your book has done. Let's see, can we get. Okay, I'll try again. So, what your book has done, Aditi, is bring together in one book several aspects of Kashi that I think is very unique. The geography, the history, the you know the Puranic accounts that make it a sacred space, and as always, beautifully written in very moving, eloquent prose. Uh, let's try this again. The book itself is, yes, there we go. So this is the book. I have enjoyed reading this a lot, and thanks to you, I got to read, a pre-publication version of it, which makes me feel even more special that I got, the sneak preview at this book. Uh, any last words that you have for our readers in that you'd want to share?
Sure. And first of all, thank you, Abhinav, for it's always a pleasure talking with someone who's actually read the book and made like as thoughtful notes about it as you have. And thank you for your endorsement for the book too, which means a lot to me. I think what's the main takeaway I have from my research on Kashi is how much and for how long we have fought for Kashi. And so an obvious part of that is what the Naga Sadhus have done. And that itself is an interesting history when you're a sadhu and you renounced everything. But for dharma, they have taken up arms because dharma, again, means being dynamic and understanding the need of the day. How our acharyas adapted and revived the Stala Purana to kind of keep it dynamic as all of these changes were happening. And they understood that this needs to be documented and preserved and transmitted. And, our people never stopped fighting for Kashi. And so the other aspect of Kashi is how hallowed and exalted it is, even though there are other cities that are sacred. That as part of the Upanayanam ceremony for young men when they're initiated, there's a symbolic journey that happens as part of that rite, a symbolic journey to Kashi. The Kashi was, literally means like to shine, the light that shines. So the sense of the city of knowledge, not just a place to go for death, but this is where people went to study, to learn. So the great acharyas, all the great acharyas went there to debate, to discuss, to learn. It's not coincidental that the Buddha, did the first turning of the wheel of dharma in Sarnath, because that's what Kashi was. And there was a time when all across India, the pronouncement of the Panditas of Kashi was held in such regard when there was a question of how to interpret the Dharma Shastras. Like that's the prestige of Kashi. And that was something that, even though there was suppression of temples, there was suppression of pathshalas and learning, people would still come. So from all across Bharat, from the south, from the east, all communities found a place in Kashi. So there's Ahilya Bai Holkar. There's also Rani Pavani from Bengal, who also established many dharmashalas. There are great Purohitas who came from the south, and then from Maharashtra and all these places. They all contributed to Kashi. And there was this understanding that every time the temples were destroyed, they were rebuilt. Every time the paths of pilgrimage were obstructed and forgotten, they were revived, because it was understood this is so important. It was worth risking our lives for. And this is something we have to understand and appreciate and do our part to contribute to, because being a sacred place also means something. It shouldn't die. So we have to keep it nurtured. We have to keep it alive, and we keep that through pilgrimage and through preserving the sanctity and the memory of the sanctity of a place. And that is our duty, and that is our dharma. And that is really what I hope people take away from the book.
And I'm sure they will. And one of the ways in which dharma is preserved and propagated is through books. Before there were oral accounts, then there were written accounts. And I think in today's age and space where everything has to be condensed into tweets and posts and memes and all, I think your book is I think is one of the. It is very important, and I think it is going to go a long way in bridging that gap between the state where people are and to the point where they can go and read and imbibe the full text, the Puranas, and imbibe the knowledge, the philosophy. I think your book is an important stepping stone, and to that end, it's been a privilege and a delight in reading your book and now in talking to you and hearing your thoughts. So thank you, Aditi, for coming on this podcast. And folks, this is the book, Kashi, The Valiant History of Sacred Geography. It's available on Padhega India, and a shout out to Prashant from Padhega India for doing everything that he does to support authors and their works. Obviously, it's available on in online stores like Amazon and elsewhere. So please do give it a read. If you read it, share your thoughts with Aditi. She is there on X, on Twitter, and do leave a rating, a review. And till the next time, thank you, folks. Namaskar.
Thank you, Abhinav.